Hi folks, this is Jay Oliver Glasgow. Welcome to Project Falcon webinar. It's good to have everybody here today. This one's a little different in that we're recording it for posterity. So if you're watching this recorded, feel free to add questions and comments and even rude remarks down below. If you're live, remember to submit your questions to the moderator and we'll answer them as we go along. Project Falcon is a self-sovereign consent DNA. It's everything that you need to know about a person's consent in a single place. And that's pretty exciting. I want to kind of get a good feel of who's watching today. So if you're attending and you are a developer or a data architect, data scientist who's responsible for actually implementing technology to use data for secondary purposes, if I could get you to just raise your hand real quick on the webinar. There we go. Okay, great. Thank you. And about how many of you are management, CTO, CMO, C-level officers, people that are responsible for the bottom line for corporations for secondary purposes of data, secondary uses? Okay, we got a few. Good, good. Quite a few. And let me lastly ask, how many of you consider yourselves privacy advocates or as what I refer to lovingly as identity people? Okay, wow. It's almost an even split today. That's exciting. So we have a great audience today. We'll be hitting something for absolutely everybody here. Project Falcon has become known as a bit of an assumption blaster. You know what assumptions are. We start every project with these assumptions, things we can and can't consider in scope for the upcoming project. And over the last couple of years, we've seemed to hear the same ones over and over again. Consumers can't know what third parties are using their data, for example, or solutions can't adhere to all regulations around the world, particularly regulations that seem to be in conflict with one another. We also hear that we can't support asynchronous identity, where a device is picked up by a person and before they even log into some sort of identity or access management platform, data is already starting to be generated and collected on the device. How do we sync that up with their consent, which might be cast later? Also, stored data and it can't be used in the same way as transactional data. Again, by a show of hands, how many people here deal with data primarily in a transactional sense, like live advertising or near real-time, one-at-a-time transactions, even if it's by the billions? It's one. Okay, great. Okay, thank you for that. And how many of you are dealing with data in a big data sense or blockchain, something that's a mass storage of some kind? Okay, great. Wow. Again, it's about an even split today. So I have something for absolutely both sides of that house there as we talk about this assumption. Another assumption we're going to blast today is that consistent legal language is impossible. And we're going to show you how it is actually possible. And lastly, frequency capping isn't feasible at the user level. And we found that actually it is. So Project Falcon offers a lot, particularly with the ability to open up the scope of our projects as we start them. As we go through this, you're going to find out that different people deal with data usage in different terms. We're going to try to bring those together today and unify us. A lot of companies say that they only have two uses of data. There's accessing data and the permissions that go around that, and using data. Whereas others have bifurcated using. So we're going to do that for the sake of this conversation, where using falls into two different buckets. One is sharing data, like external marketing and analytics reports, where you might be selling insights to other businesses. And also the ability to send information to a person. These are what you might find in regulations from like the FTC or FCC. They call them the do nots, like do not mail, do not email, do not text, etc. So these are the do nots. We're going to deal with those in three different buckets. So accessing, sharing, and sending. And you're going to find that with this project, Falcon, that we have a solution that scales across all of those and hopefully you're ready for this, across all jurisdictions, across all uses of information, across all businesses, and lastly, it supports all technology we've been able to find. Now, these sound like just crazy, wild claims, but as you dig in, I think you're going to find that this is remarkably simple to do. So this is indeed an assumption blaster. Before we begin, I just want to say you're going to feel like we're eating an elephant today. We are to a certain degree, but we're going to do it one tiny bite at a time. I'm going to spell bite B-Y-T-E because I want to just squeeze out absolutely every pun that I can. No, I'm kidding. I'll stop now. That'll be the last one. Okay, thanks, Phil, for that vote of confidence. Okay, yeah, I'll probably have a couple of more puns. I don't mean to punish anybody. Okay, that's my last one. No, it's not. All right, so before we begin, a little word about the privacy co-op. What the heck is a privacy co-op? And this isn't a commercial. We're a nonprofit cooperative association. We have members and affiliates. We try to solve the world's privacy issues with the cunning use of paper. We're not a product offering. We consider ourselves a marketplace for your products and your offerings. And we do so by signing up members. We hope everybody on this session will become a member of the Privacy Co-op. It costs $25. That's not a lot of money. For a lifetime membership, if it's a little steep for you, get in touch with me. Maybe I can work out a discount for you for putting up with this webinar today. We see our members not as consumers, right? So people that are using your platforms and services, you might think of them as consumers. We see them as producing something. They are producing information rights by engaging your system. And our affiliates, we have an agreement for them so that they can consume those information rights. They can gain licensing of the opt-ins for the use of that data. So in this way, we're helping businesses find and grow opt-ins, and we're helping our consumers find value for their rights. It's a great blend of two pieces of paper. So as I promised, we're going to take a quick pause. I think we have a couple of questions coming in through the moderator, and we'll address them right after this quick break. All right, welcome back. And we had a couple of questions during the break. Monique asked, oh my goodness, already asking for the discount. Super. To become a member of the Privacy Co-op, if you want a discount, just write me a quick note to webinar@privacycoop.com with an email address and a number of people in your household. We'll see what we can set you up with, Monique. And Jill asked me a question. She said, how does her business look into becoming an affiliate? Super. You can go to privacycoop.com/business. That's the link. Or just reach out to me. I'll get you in touch with the right folks. So we're going to do a little sentence diagramming, taking us all back to our 7th grade English. How much fun is that? So that we can understand consent in the way that it applies to Project Falcon. On the left-hand side of this sentence, we have a subject. This is singular in nature, right? It's a person, place, or thing. And you'd be surprised how many times I give this webinar and I have senior VPs saying person, that's a phone number, right? Or an email address. No, we mean a carbon-based life form, borrowing from Star Trek. And for all of those, they might get upset that we're not including crystalline entities. I'll point out that the C in CBLF could stand for crystalline as well. So carbon-based life forms, person, place, or thing, right? A tree, a browser, a cell phone. And on the subject side, on the left-hand side, we're going to deal with just one of those, right? Now, on the predicate side, we need all three of these things represented. We have an organization, a program. That's a legal secondary use of information, and jurisdictionality. Now, I wish that I could go back in time about 12 or 14 years ago when lawyers started using the term program to describe the legal secondary use of information, because it gets a bit confusing to our technology friends, right? They think of program in slightly different terms. But just so that we're all on the same page here together, we're going to be saying program here, and we mean a legal use of information. On the predicate side, you need at least one of all three of those things present and relating to one and only one subject. Now, the relationship is the data that's being used, right? It can be individual data, it could be aggregate data, it could be de-identified data, it could be re-identified data. It doesn't really matter. It's some sort of data in between. And we had some challenges last year as we were working through the standards for this. We had people saying, are you trying to say that you're coming up with a one-size-fits-all solution for these things? And we say, well, no, what we're really trying to say is that all sizes fit into this one solution. It's not that we're trying to have one solution for all sizes, but I think you'll see what we mean as we go through this. I want to focus specifically for a moment on two of those predicates: the organization, that's the business, and a program, a legal use of data. We've all played Battleship when we were kids. You know, Milton Bradley's Battleship, G4 hit, H2 miss. I'm going to take those two elements and I'm going to put them out on a battleship grid for a moment. So we have businesses, organizations, right? Can be government agencies down the left-hand side creating these rows. And across the top, we have legal uses of data. So you can see that there's, for example, I think it's column number 4 is for highway safety studies. Can I use your data for highway safety studies? So on this particular grid, we have General Motors is in row R, and we have highway safety studies in column 4. We see that at this intersection, we arrive at a value of either a 0 or a 1. We can have a default value that's initially set by regulations on whether or not General Motors should be allowed to do that per regulations. But General Motors might have their own attorneys look at that regulation and make a determination that contradicts what the regulations are saying. Maybe the regulations say yes, you can, and the attorneys say, well, just for prudence sake, we're going to say no, we can't until we get an opt-in from that customer. So businesses can certainly change that value. Lastly, a consumer, you're driving a General Motors car, you might say, well, I don't care what General Motors says. I want to change that value to what I want it to be. So in this way, the value at these intersections can change and evolve over time depending on who's setting them. So if I zoom in on a single intersection here, let's take J4, for example. This would be Fannie Mae using data for highway safety studies. You can see that we're not trying to pack everything into these intersections. We're just keeping it to a 0 or a 1, but certainly external to it and related to that intersection, we can have metadata. We can have information from outside sources that inform the value of that 0 or 1. And certainly that intersection is addressable via pointers or from some other technology. And then lastly, we have the a potential for additional logic to be added to these things as well. Now, I want to kind of focus in on the upper left-hand quadrant of this grid and make a statement that we're going to honor the integrity of this upper left-hand quadrant. What does that mean? Well, it means that if a business goes out of business, we're just going to have that row for that business exists there forever. And on columns, as far as uses of data goes, if a particular use goes out of vogue, we're still going to maintain the column there. Certainly we can do that without any problem. So I'm going to say that we're just focusing on that upper left-hand quadrant. We're going to honor it. I'm going to take this and lay it down on the floor for a moment so I can demonstrate by keeping that integrity of the upper left-hand quadrant, what can we do with that? Well, first of all, we can continue to add more and more businesses to the bottom of this grid forever. And we can continue to add more and more uses of data to the right-hand side of this grid forever, right? So in this way, we can achieve something pretty cool. We can have data that's collected today be used in compliance with regulations that come into being 50 years from now. And we can have data collected 50 years from now used in compliance with programs that exist today. This is an exciting assumption blaster and allows corporations to deal with uses of data with a little bit more confidence, even though they can't predict the future. Now, why did I lay this down on the floor? I wanted to make a complete copy of that grid and layer it down on top of the first copy. Why in the world would I do that? Well, that entire new copy of it, if you look at that in that blue plane, we can assign to a jurisdiction like GDPR. And if that jurisdiction, say like GDPR, says, hey, we're going to deal with consent very heavily front-loaded for opt-in, we're going to do what we call an opt-in scheme or approach to consent management, they can set the values for that second column for all in however they want to. They can set them to a 0 or 1 and say this is the default state per this regulation. Well, likewise, we can take another copy of that and layer on top of the first two and assign it to California, where they may say we want to heavily slant this towards an opt-out. And that's easy. They can take a copy of the grid and set the default settings in that first column for all out to however they want. So they can say, hey, I'm setting that first column to all out. And that means that a person has to opt out. We want to lean towards an opt-out scheme. That's fine too. Well, we can continue to do this up forever, right? So we can do a layer for Nigeria. We can do a layer for USPA 74. And as we're doing this, I want to illustrate for you, if you look in the back there, there's that intersection J4 that we were talking about earlier. I've drawn a little dashed line going all the way down because that J4 still exists in all of those planes. I'm going to separate out those diagrams of the complete layers and just focus in on that J4, the use of data by Fannie Mae for highway safety study. And I'm going to tilt this out towards the audience so you can better see down it. And why am I doing that? Well, because we can assign initial values per those jurisdictions. Now, if a calling party doesn't specify a jurisdiction, they're going to get back a 0 because there's a single 0 within the axis all the way down. This is doing a bitmap version of an and or an or, right? This is bitwise functionality that exists in every programming language, right? At the very core of every programming language. So this is something machines do very quickly. And they can determine whether they can get a 0 or a 1 out if there are no rules specified. But if a calling party says, hey, no, I just want to use the data in compliance with USPA 74, well, they might get back a 1, right? So if you specify that jurisdictionality, you might get back a totally different value from the bitmap. So, this is the way the privacy co-op has been working for years. When companies say, hey, can I use this data? Well, if it's a member and the member has not opted out of the company and they're licensing the use of the information, then they're going to get back a 1 for that entire intersection for a co-op member. But likewise, if a member opts out, we're just going to flip all of those numbers all the way down the grid to a 0. So it manages it very nicely, very cleanly, very quickly. And remember those first two columns, we have an all out or an all in column. They can relate to these things. And when you're doing your bitmap computations and traversing the bitmap, you can just include those in your conjunction statements within the language. So if you're doing an and or an or on the bitmap, you can say, hey, let me take this into consideration. Did they cast an all out? Or, potentially did they cast an all in at some point? So we're going to take a quick pause because I covered some information there. We're now in 3 dimensions within our bitmap, and I bet you have some great questions. So go ahead and submit those real quick to the administrator while we watch this. All right, and we're back, and we do have a question from Robert he wants to follow along with the documentation as we're going through this, and he asks where it is. You can go to tinyurl.com/Falcon CNS. That's tinyurl.com, Falcon CNS. In the invitation to the webinar, we have a direct link to that same destination point. It's a Google Doc that's available. And if you want to become an author or editor on the document, reach out to me. We'll see if we can't get you listed there. All right, so in this next section, I'm going to do a demonstration for you of the various ways that we can use this bitmap in the wild. We have an actual bitmap running, and we have some demonstration JSON in front of you. So in this first illustration, we're going to take Ford Motor Company, and they're going to be concerned about the jurisdictions of USA 74 and CCPA. That's in the predicate of this. So we have Ford and those two jurisdictions. And what's the data use here? We have a data use mask of 8. Now that in this particular case, 8 is representing something like aggregate and anonymous reports. So this would be largely opt-outs in a lot of the jurisdictions. Some it would still be an opt-in. And what do we have in the payload here? We have Ford Motor Company listing those individual subjects that we talked about earlier. So persons, places, and things, right? So we have email addresses, phone numbers, and we have some account identifiers. Well, let's take that first call to the JSON, to the bitmap, and I think you're going to see that it moves, fairly quickly. They're going to do the send, and what do we get back here? They got back on the right-hand side all ones. So in this particular case, Ford could use this data collected per those two jurisdictions, for all of these subjects. Excellent. Okay, well, let's make a modification to the JSON. Let's add another jurisdiction. In this case, we're adding GDPR. Now, it's largely an opt-in strategy, right? So maybe these customers haven't opted in. Let's find out. So Ford does a hit against the bitmap, and this time they get back all zeros. So by adding that one jurisdiction, maybe they were collecting some data from some countries in Europe in this particular batch, and they said we got to adhere to those regulations as well. They got back a 0. Now, let's make this a little more specific. Let's go into targeted advertising. So we've changed the data usage mask to 16. So this is Ford Motor Company for the same subjects, one and the same jurisdictions, wanting to use the data for something, pretty stringent, going in and saying we want to get into sensitive personal information or personally identifiable information, and we want to do some targeted advertising. Well, when they run this against the bitmap, we're probably going to expect a little more stringent filtering on the results, and indeed we got back all zeros. All right, so Ford can't do that. That would be a no-go, because for those subjects, they don't have any opt-ins for any of those things. Now, let's take another illustration. Let's take a different company here. Let's pretend for a moment that AT&T is an affiliate of this particular authorized agent. And Privacy Co-op is not the only authorized agent. We certainly are an authorized agent, but there are others out there in the world. So you can have multiple authorized agencies working on these bitmaps. In this particular case, let's just say that AT&T is an affiliate of a particular authorized agent within this bitmap. They're coming in and saying, hey, for these same subjects, can we use the data for targeted advertising? Well, you might have some of those subjects that are members of that authorized agent, and they've licensed the use of their information. And indeed, we get back 2 ones, right? So they can use data for 2 of these subjects as an opt-in. They have an affirmative express consent on record. It can be proven, it has non-repudiation backing it up, etc. So for limiting their risk and liability, a company like AT&T could come in and say, can we do this? They get back a yes. And it happens very quickly. Okay, let's take a look at a different company. Let's say Verizon is also an affiliate of that particular privacy co-op or authorized agency. And in this case, one of those members of the same co-op said, you know what, for North Carolina, I don't want my data being used. So at some point they were presented with a user interface for something very specific, and they opted out. So this illustration, this definitely illustrates how much flexibility there is in the bitmap. Let's see what happens here when Verizon makes this request. They get back, oh, look, they got a 0 for that one customer, but they got a 1 for the other customer. AT&T got 2 ones, right? Verizon didn't. Maybe they had a very specific opt-out from one of those customers. And you can also see here that if they drop that USA 74, maybe the data wasn't collected in North Carolina. So maybe their attorney said, hey, we don't need to adhere to US 74 for this particular data batch. It's the exact same run against the exact same data. And in this case, well, they got back a 1. Right? So because they were no longer within the jurisdiction of that particular opt-out, they get to use the data. Can you see how this is really starting to open up the most avenues for healthy, transparent use of data across all jurisdictions, across all uses, across all businesses, right? So we're really starting to see those claims, the crazy claims that we made at the beginning of this presentation, coming to fruition. Still to come, we're going to talk about compressing these bitmaps. How small can we go? We're going to talk about lazy provisioning. That's part of that answer, and dated versioning. We're also going to talk about applications to browsers and applications and devices and big data. I promised you we're going to talk about big data. If you have any follow-ups that you'd like to make with me directly, you can send me an email at j@privacycoop.com. I'll be happy to answer as fast as I can. And let's take a quick break for some additional questions right after this. All right, so we have a question here from Sally. She asks, how small can we get this bitmap? It's not how small we can get it, Sally. It's how large we can get it. If we pack everything into this is projecting out over the next 20 years, we're going to still be under 84 kilobytes. Surprised? Let me show you how we do that. I want to kind of redraw the grid we were talking about earlier. And remember all those different planes of existence, right? We had all the different jurisdictions, we had the businesses down the left-hand side and the uses of data across the top, right? We're gonna take that and compress it into a wafer. We're just gonna basically zoom out for a moment on this and show you, if you think about those layers and how they compress down into something like hex code, it gets pretty tiny. Right? So as we're projecting growth for businesses against GLIFE, that's the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, for all businesses that are listed in GLIFE for the next 20 years. And we talk about the growth of programs, the uses of data over the next 20 years, and even regulations, 10 times of what we have right now. We're still under 84 kilobytes, and that's if we have a fully grown bitmap. But in most cases, they're not going to be fully grown, Sally. Now, what in the world do I mean by that? Well, remember that we were going to be relating a lot of information to these bitmaps, but not storing them within the bitmaps, right? So this is the metadata that can be associated with it, the addressability of it. Well, part of that is the ability to lazy provision these. That means that we only touch the elements that are requested within a bitmap. So a bitmap can start out very, very tiny. If you're just asking for one particular use of data in one particular intersection, that's a 0 or a 1 in your bitmap. It doesn't take up very much space. As we make changes over time, we make dated copies of them. I want to see if we can visualize that in a moment. But first, if you just look at how we're taking the natural language of the way we've been dealing with bitmaps since day one in computer science, we talk about vocabulary such as words, and so a business could be a word within the bitmap, and we could have logic trumping right within the bitmap as well. So just using natively what's available to us in every programming language. Can you see how we say that this starts to be used across all technologies? That's kind of exciting. We haven't found a language yet that doesn't have bitmap management as a core functionality within its library. And this even transcends beyond the internet, right? So in Internet of Things and in Zigbee and Z-Wave and other transports, right? You have this ability to manage bitmaps because it's the way machines think. So this becomes very native to the way the machines think, which is awesome. Okay, I'm going to take that one bitmap here and explode it out over time, going from right to left. So for all of our friends that read from the right to left, there's a few different languages in the world that do that. If you look at this, if we start on March the 15th on the right-hand side, it might be just a few intersections that get touched and created, instantiated in this particular bitmap. Now in June, the following June, maybe that customer was asked, can we also use your data for X, Y, or Z? And they said yes or no. And so we added some to that. Well, we didn't just add it to the original. We made a copy of the original and dated it. Now we can do a diff between those two things and see what has changed. And with the records of who's requesting this information, guess what? You're starting to be able to determine third-party usage of data over time. You can say, what's my difference here? What's the delta between A and B? Who asked for that? And when did it occur? So now just by replicating as opposed to updating a single copy of it, we start to instantly get this native ability to track changes to the bitmap over time. And you see as the time progresses here through the following October, the following April, the following November, you see all of these changes coming about. Well, look, what happened in February here, February 14th, Valentine's Day? What in the heck happened there? Well, it's possible that a new program was introduced, right? There was some new secondary use of data that was added to the bitmap, and so it was implemented, and we were able to update this particular bitmap with default values. So this is how bitmaps can grow over time, but still remain very, very tiny. Okay, a quick word about PubSub. Instead of businesses polling the bitmap constantly, which is taxing the internet as well as their own servers, it makes a lot of sense for this standard to have a PubSub ability. So publishing and subscribing information. What does that mean? Well, it means that a business like Walmart could say, hey, we're interested in changes to the bitmap for Walmart. Should they be allowed to do that? Yeah, absolutely. That's how they're going to get the opt-outs and opt-ins in near real time. So in this case, Walmart may say, hey, I want to subscribe to those changes. Well, as lazy provisioning events happen, they're published out to all those subscribers. Well, it's not just the businesses that might want to subscribe to this. You might want to subscribe to this, right? You might want to know, hey, is anybody asking to use the data for my cell phone or my television or my car? Right? You certainly should be able to do that. So, individual subjects should be able to subscribe to that. Well, if you think about that, jurisdictions also should be able to subscribe. If you think about a country that's, lawmakers are putting these laws into place, if they could gain insights that are aggregate and anonymized, that tell them, hey, we just put this regulation in place, and here's how it's impacting businesses. Here's how it's impacting our citizens. Right? This is kind of exciting because before now, there's never been an ability for lawmakers to be able to get insights into the regulations that they're putting into place. So for these things, right, verified auditors, verified subjects, all of them should be able to subscribe to this. And, a little word about frequency capping here, because we mentioned that as one of the assumptions at the beginning of this thing. Well, if you have an authorized agent who is managing the opt-ins and opt-outs for a particular member, if you're subscribing to it, you can count the number of times it's been requested and change a 1 to a 0. So you could have a member say, you know what, I'm willing to receive 10 messages on my phone a week if the data is being licensed, if I know who's using it, and I'm getting some sort of payment for it. So now you have an ability to support royalties being paid in microtransactions to that individual. This opens up an entire new avenue of economy. And you think about the value to big businesses, right? You would be able to get an affirmative express consent. You're paying pennies on the dollar versus what you're having to pay lawyers to try to keep you out of trouble. This would be just going directly as a direct value exchange to that user saying, I want to be able to send this to you. Well, some customers might set that all the way down to 0 and say, I don't want to do it. Others might say, hey, you're paying me. I'll take 100 of those a day. So in this way, you can have frequency capping, not at the advertiser's level or the publisher's level, right? This is at the subject's level, managed by their authorized agencies. So this opens up some really cool possibilities. Within the privacy co-op, we've launched a beta test for this. And if you're a company that's interested in working with us, we're putting exactly those tools in the hands of our members to where they can go out and have validated endpoints, email addresses, phone numbers, street addresses. They can set a frequency and see how much they're going to get paid per month for that information flowing to them, and they can cap it. So this puts the controls completely in the hands of the people that we're all interested in helping. So because these bitmaps are addressable in a standardized way, look what we just opened up. Browsers, applications, devices, smart television sets, right? Internet of Things, and even big data can all point to these bitmaps. And because the bitmaps are small, they can be replicated. So we're going to have a word for big data fans. Before you start freaking out going, oh my gosh, that's going to be impossible. It's not impossible. It'll actually speed up your writes to your hard drives, to your data lakes, and totally eliminate the downtime between your map reductions. And we'll cover that in a minute. But just right now, I want you to kind of focus in with me for a moment on a browser. So for browsers, for a browser manufacturer, let's say somebody like Mozilla or Google Chrome or Apple Safari or Brave, that's another one that's out right now, Microsoft Edge, there are many to choose from, right? Their attorneys can work with their developers and say, for this browser, these are the bitmaps we're interested in. These are the jurisdictions that we're interested in. These are the uses of data. And they can open these abilities up natively within the browser to a public commons, much like they're already using the DNS, right? The domain name system. This would be the CNS. So the browser certainly could use those as well. But this does something else. This takes the application developers and gives them the same tools that the browser developers have. So if you're an application developer and you don't want to worry about relying on APIs consistently across all browsers, which those can be problematic, your app can just simply make the call to the same CNS and bypass the browser, right? So in this way, application developers have just as much freedom as the browser developers do. Right, so quick quiz here. Can this mechanism allow an organization to self-identify if they already comply with some jurisdictions and, get an opt-in for all other jurisdictions where they don't? It's a trick question. The answer is yes, right? The answer is yes. So we finally have a mechanism where businesses can say, hey, I'm self-identifying right here. We already comply with these things. I don't know if we comply with those things. Hey, folks, there's some really great protocols out there, like XACML, that are industry standards. And if you have a consistent, a policy enforcement point that's been decoupled from your policy decision point, this can become a policy information point for your policy decision point, and you can pop that little user interface up. There's a standard that was published 10 years ago. Wow. It was called personal LOA, personal levels of assurance. You can look it up online. It's a free standard, and you can follow those guidelines and do exactly that. So we're going to open this up for some questions right now, if you have any, right after this message. All right, welcome back. We have a question from Rakesh on big data, asking how would a big data map reduction be able to do this? The answer is by the use of pointers. That's coming up next, Rakesh. So bear with me for a second, because we do need to talk to big data right now. This is, I think, the most exciting part of the presentation. Right, because right now, what do we have in the big data world? We have kind of a chasm between advertisers and consumers. And we have this big data, poorly drawn snow cap in the middle. So we have all this big data, and it's unclear to us, how do we satisfy this gap? And we have some pretty big advertising organizations in the world that are dealing with data in a transactional way. They also have big data groups, and I think it's unclear to them, how do they combine those things? How do they connect the dots so that the big data insights can be rendered with the exact same assurances that a transactional kind of cookie question is being asked of the individual at the same time. So that's exactly what we're about to talk about, Rakesh. So I'm glad you asked the question. If you think about big data, and here's a big data center in France, they also have attorneys with their developers, talking to the developers saying, can we do this? Can we do that? Well, with the bitmaps in place, right, you can point to intersections. Now, because these bitmaps are 85 kilobytes at the largest, they're easy to replicate. You have a data store of record, but then you're already subscribing to events that change. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a company maintaining a co-located copy of these bitmaps. They're very, very tiny within the data center, where they're going to be doing some fairly large scale map reductions. Right? So the attorneys working with the big data developers in France might ask a totally different set of questions than the attorneys working with a big data group in California, right? So they might be looking at different intersections. They might be looking at different jurisdictions, data uses. Some of them might be doing aggregate and anonymized big data map reductions. Other might be doing something very targeted or with personally identifiable information, right? So to think about this, I want to kind of go back to our grid for a moment. And the question is, can the same calling parties ask for points across multiple uses of data? And I think that's really getting to the big data question, right? In other words, can somebody like Procter and Gamble use data that was collected for COVID tracing, potentially for getting the word out to people that might be good candidates for an immunization, for a vaccine, right? Which those might be covered under wildly different regulations, some of them involving HIPAA and some of them involving personally identifiable information. So in this case, can you combine those things? The answer is absolutely yes. Within the predicate, you can have combinations of these things, right? And so for the big data platform, and we're going to get to pointers in just a minute, bear with me, I want to show the lawyers here, because remember, we were talking at the very beginning, can you use consistent language across these things? Well, because you can address individual intersections in aggregate, you can combine them. This opens up a really cool opportunity for master service agreements. Instead of having 250 pages of legal gobbledygook, no offense, that we have to sign every single time we install a flashlight app on our phones, how about if we only ask the new pertinent questions? So we could start with a master service agreement binder, the headers and the footers of the agreement, to say, this is going to be a master service agreement between this company and you. And over time, we're going to add additional schedules, right? So now the lawyers can write very specific schedule language. It might be just a sentence or two around, intersection C2. They may also have a very specific language written around D2, right? So across the entire row, that company might come up with very tiny little micro agreements that they can stitch together in a composite and show the user. If you think about this from the user's perspective, what's happening over time? They're seeing these agreements asynchronously as needed. And now the contracts are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Instead of seeing the same boilerplate language over and over again, the users, the consumers, the producers of the information rights are being treated with a little bit of legal respect here, and they're seeing just the question that needs to be answered for this particular consent, and it gets stored in the bitmap. You don't have to go back and ask that question over and over and over again, right? Unless they've changed it from a 1 to a 0. So once a person is opted in, if the master service agreement language covers it, they're opted in. You don't have to go back and ask them over and over again. This makes things easier on the user. So we think that there's a lot of wisdom in this approach, and makes it a lot easier for your customers to survive reading all of these agreements. One last note on this. As time passes, all of these bespoke little agreements that company A does, the company B does, the way lawyers work, right? You copy and paste, you borrow language from other agreements. Eventually, this will start to evolve into a body of, common language across, not only criminal type regulations, but also contractual regulations. And this is pretty cool because ultimately this starts to form a commons of risks, right? I think that's an exciting place for us to get to as a global community over time, that the language is not just consistent, but it's evolving towards a commons of risks. Now for Rakesh, I know you're holding on. Thank you for holding on for a few minutes there for us to get to the pointers. So here's my point. There's a pun for you, Rakesh. You knew it was coming. All right. So on the pointer side of things, within a big data lake, a lot of time is spent on scrubbing data, right? So as the data is flowing into a data lake, you have opt-outs or opt-ins from the customers that are impacted, and you're literally having to delete records as a body of data is being prepped for use in a map reduction. We sometimes call that hydrating a lake. As you're hydrating your lake, which is a process that can take a lot of time, those writes to disk take longer because you're pausing with some logic to say, hey, this record belongs to Brian. Can we do this per Brian's, opt-ins and opt-outs, yes or no? And based upon the answer to that, you're deleting the data or not writing it to a disk. So this slows things down for your writes to your disk. But think about this. If you could, on the ingestion of that data, not worry about what Brian thinks one way or the other for any of these uses of data, but you just simply pre-pin Brian's data record with a pointer that includes an identifier or an address to the bitmap, that write to the disk is going to speed up. We've seen in very large 6 or 7 petabyte examples, when we've tested this in a laboratory setting, that the writes to disk go way up very fast, right? So it's saving your company time as you're writing these things to disk. But here's the bigger point. If you think about this, when you get done using that data for that bitmap, for that map reduction, rather than going through and draining the whole lake and rehydrating it, which in some cases can take up to 12 hours, right? You just go on to the next map reduction. Your pointers start to resolve what it is that you're wanting to do within the map reduction as a component of the map reduction itself, as a component of the math, right, of the algorithm of the map reduction. You have the resolution of this pointer to the bitmap that's co-located with the data, right? So it's just using 2 bits of data like you're already doing in big data. You're already doing this with maybe as many as 17 different features in any kind of decent insight that you're evolving. This just becomes an 18th feature that you're including within your map reduction. So what we saw in a practical example of a map reduction that took 4 hours to implement under traditional approaches of doing things, we added 4 minutes and 13 seconds to that with the additional feature set of consent management being resolved by the bitmap. That 4 minutes and 13 seconds was less time than we saved on the write to disk. And both of those pale in comparison to the 12 hours of downtime that the data lake experienced by resetting the data in between map reductions to adhere to different regulations, right? So this is a huge cost saver for big business, for big data. right? And while I've been talking here, I've had this slide up so you can see maybe a suggestion of what a standard pointer might look like, right? We can have information from groups like IAB's privacy string, Interactive Advertising Bureau. That could be a component of the pointer. You could have an organization. You could even maintain a little bit of information here about your own referential integrity. And certainly you could have the predicate reference to the bitmap. That's the most important part. And then optionally, you could have the subject identifier, whatever identity scheme that you have. So whether you're dealing with your own identity internally or you're working with an outside vendor, there are a lot of them, really great ones out there. You could include some sort of attribute for that identity within this. And then finally, you get to the customer's data. So you're just pre-pending this as to a tagging as part of your data ingestion into the big data lake on every single record. Because you're doing this, and this is a really big idea, what I'm about to lay on you. When Sally or Joe or Jim Bob changes their mind and they're no longer opted in, they're now opted out, you don't have to go through billions and billions of records and flip a bit, right? You just go to the bitmap and change the 1 to a 0 or the 0 to the 1. And the next time you do a map reduction, the data is either included or excluded based upon the customer's wishes, right? So the cost savings of this thing start to really add up. I don't know if you're as excited as I am. I'm seeing a couple of like smiley faces in the comments out there, and I appreciate it, and a couple of thumbs up. Yeah, this is big stuff, right? This is really, really big stuff for big data. Cool. So, the interoperability opportunity is there. There's a lot of standards that are being suggested for this identifier. You could do it in plain text. You could do it in encryption, but there are some people out there that are saying for the new cookieless browsers that are coming out, how are we going to manage the identity of the user? And this is certainly an area just ripe. Great opportunity for interoperability to be managed right here. For example, Universal ID 2.0 is a standard that's being discussed right now on the West Coast as part of this initiative to remove cookies from browsers. So here's the opportunity, guys, to just plug right in, and gals, to plug right in to this new CNS in a standardized way. I want to step back from this about a 50,000-foot view, Rakesh, and talk about some of the complexities in nexus arguments legally that big data faces, right? You have a cell phone in India that's generating data that's being collected in France, and insights or raw data are being sold to a company in California. What are the jurisdictions? What do we have to worry about? Whose laws do we need to conform to? If you've been following this talk so far, you say, this is easy, right? This is just an X, Y, and Z. This is a little resolution within that pointer in the big data. You just include the necessary jurisdictionality, which might be the Z axis, right, of those. So you just, the little red Zs that you see there, you plug those in per what your attorneys are saying, and you prepin your data with that as it's being ingested into the lake, and you're done. Cool? All right, got a thumbs up from Rakesh. Thanks, man, appreciate it. If you have any other questions on that, reach out to me. But boy, howdy, is this exciting stuff for big data. So standardized updates can be made from all different sources. We're going to have different thresholds, right? So if you're driving in your car and you need to do something instantly and without any interruption of the driver, you need to be able to make that user interface safe and easy for the driver. So car companies are constantly focused on that with highway safety, right? So the idea here is you don't want in that moment to say to the user, hey, can you pull out your wallet and show us an ID card for this particular use of data? You want to make that threshold very low. Typically, it's going to be something like an opt-out rather than an opt-in, and it's going to be some component that has to do with some heuristic that doesn't take your eyes off the road or whatever. But certainly, If you are saying, hey, we're wanting you to opt into something that's dealing with certain, sensitive personal information or personally identifiable information, you want that threshold to be a little higher. So in the standards work that we have before us in the CNS, we need to think through those things and make sure that we're addressing them in the right way. Wow, we just covered a lot, Rakesh. So if Rakesh or anybody else has any questions about big data, about pointers, now's the time to ask them right after this. All right, we have a question from Mary online, specifically around authentication and the thresholds that we were talking about and how that works within the bitmap. Mary, one of the key facets here is to understand that there's kind of a hierarchy of this architecture I'm about to go into right now in this section. It's perfect for your question. But we see authentication as an element of a product that rides on top of a platform such as this. And you have platforms that run below it, right? So let me get into the architecture a little bit in the coming slides, and we'll talk about how you can have plug and play authentication on the front end of this thing. We definitely want to make sure that this commons supports all of the authentication mechanisms that are out in the wild, right? We want to support our friends and family that are already in this business, and we want to encourage new development as well. I think you'll see where this plugs in the coming section. Great lead in. Thank you, Mary. So I want to kind of go back to that bitmap for a moment and just refresh your memory that this is a wafer of all those jurisdictions and uses across all those businesses for a particular subject. And because it's so tiny, that means that we have the opportunity here to distribute these things. So for all you architects out there, you're thinking right now, wow, this would be really simple to do a geo-distributed, geo-redundant system. In fact, you might start thinking about the existing DNS, right? The domain name system. That's exactly what we have in mind, is to take the open source for DNS. Don't try to reinvent the wheel, but just all we're doing is changing out the guts and the functionality of what does DNS do. It's a name value pair where you take a URL that's passed in and get back an IP address, right? We're just changing out the name value pair to this is a JSON requesting consent information, and here's back your list of ones and zeros that you get back from it. Other than that, it would be nice to reuse as much of the DNS platform as we possibly can to get this geo redundancy and geo distribution. For our friends that are in the authentication business, in the identity business, in the identity and access management business, how about blockchain business, self-sovereign identity? Wow, you guys are all over the place out there. The denominations of identirati. These are good, right? You've got some folks out there that have already specialized in things like how do we take a biometric and make sure that only the person that should control that biometric actually ends up controlling that biometric. We're not trying to reinvent that wheel at all. We're trying to make a standardized API where those folks can work with this bitmap. And in fact, it's a brilliant idea that if you have these pointers to like multiple sets of DNA, and remember, a subject can be a person, place, or thing. It could be a tree. It could be a cell phone. It could be a person, a carbon-based life form, right? You have companies out there that have already figured out some really great secret sauce around self-sovereign identity or around blockchain solutions, right? And I'm not saying those are the same thing, so don't write me your nasty grams. I get them all the time. Two totally different things that can be, that's fine, right? The point is that people that relate stuff to other stuff, and they do it very, very well. And you can say that they validate information that can later be verified, right? That validation and that connecting the dots behind the scenes can leverage the pointers to the bitmap. We don't have to merge those things within the bitmap. It makes a lot of sense architecturally to just let the bitmap be the bitmap and allow those relationships to be maintained in one or more places external to it, right? So we're not trying to step in and solve all those problems, but we're wanting to facilitate a portion of those solutions. And remember those assumptions lists at the beginning of this meeting? That's what's really key here, right? Is the idea that we're removing those assumptions. If your associative functionality that you've built and you sell day by day faces one of those assumptions, use the bitmap to help you get around it. It's not trying to replace your product. It's trying to enhance your product. It's adding an extension, a natural extension to what you already have. You'd be surprised how many really great technological companies have had trouble understanding this. They come to Project Falcon and they say, are you trying to replace what I'm already doing? Not at all. We want to be a public commons that allows you to get past some of your own assumption blockers in your projects, right? So for Mary, I think it was, we were just talking a moment ago about authentication. Here's the stack. If you look at it from my perspective, and this is architecture, right? This is really dumbing it down, maybe too much. But the idea is that a lot of businesses, certainly the privacy co-op is one, we have a data plane, we have an accounting plane, and we have a security plane. With the existence of this bitmap with interfaces in the right place to the accounting plane, you no longer potentially need a data plane at all. Or if you do, it's all that metadata that's associated with the bitmap, right? So in this way, you can see on this diagram here where you have platforms on one side of the solution and products on the other. That authentication component is right there on the right-hand side in the blue called products. If you're a platform, if you're like DigiMe or some such, company that's doing data in a vault, and you want to maintain copies of data and provide access management to it either in a micro or macro way, guess what? That platform still functions, right? This would just be an added ability to do some of the micro consent mechanisms along with it. I think it would enhance what some of those folks are doing. All right. Wow. So what an exciting meeting this has been, certainly for me. This is binary for thank you. So you get your ones and your zeros in. I appreciate everybody coming. If you have any questions, reach out to us at Privacy Co-op, and have a great day.